Hello again, guys. Thanks for joining me today. Today, we're going to continue our discussion on some Java fundamentals. Today, we're actually going to talk about some different type of loops, specifically while loops and do while loops that we can use to perform certain iterations on our code. The first loop that I'm going to talk to you guys about today is the while loop. And I'm going to show you how you can perform the same, you can execute the same block of code numerous times as long as a specific condition is continually met. In this first example that I have for you all, it says that there's an integer named number is currently set to 0. The while loop structure is like this, as you can see, it's the while keyword in parentheses of the condition that you're going to continuously be considering, similar to an if loop, but this is going to be, sorry, similar to an if statement, but this is going to be performed numerous times. Each time it's performed, the program is going to check and it's going to see if the condition inside the parentheses is correct. So in this while statement, in this while loop, it's basically saying as long as the number is less than 50, we want you to print out example one and then the number that it currently is. Inside of the actual while loop block, you can see that there's an action being performed that's going to change the value of the variable that we're considering each time this loop goes around. In this case, we're actually incrementing the number by 1 each time. So each time this while loop circles around, it's going to say, is the number currently less than 50? If so, I'm going to perform this action that's inside of this while loop. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. It should print out numbers 0 to 49 because 49 is the last number that is technically the last integer that's technically less than 50. But let's see if it works like we're expecting. Yes, and it seems to be working perfectly. And while we're on the topic of while loops in Java, I did want to make an important point. In loops in Java, when you already know how many times you want that particular loop to execute, it's recommended that you use a for loop instead of a while loop. And we'll talk about for loops in a future video. While you can use while loops for those purposes, like in the examples that I have here. It's usually recommended that you use for loops if you already know how many times you want that specific loop to execute. But the reason that I've used these type of examples is just for simplicity and so that you can see how a while loop works in general. But usually you will be using a while loop to say read from a file. You don't know how many lines are in that file, but you do know that you want to read the entire file. That's just an example. There are many other examples where you could use while loops, but to keep it general, normally you want to use a while loop when you don't know how many times you may want that loop to iterate, and you're going to want to use a for loop when you know specifically how many times you want that loop to iterate. Okay, so in the example two that I have here, you can see that the number I've now set it to 120. And in this while loop, I'm basically saying, I want you to perform this action system printout ln example two, and then the number, as long as the number is currently less than 100. I've set the number to 120, but each time this while loop goes around, what it's actually going to do is it's going to decrement, it's going to lower it -1 each time. So it's slowly decreasing each time this while loop is executed. So what we should see is we should see something like it should start at 120 and then it should go all the way to 101 because 101 is the last integer that is greater than 100. But let's see if this works correct. And it looks like that worked correctly. And another example I have here for you guys It's not a while loop, but it's a do while loop, which is another type of loop in Java that's similar to a while loop, but it performs a little differently. So unlike a while loop, it doesn't consider the while condition until after it has already executed the contents of the do while loop at least once. So when this do while executes, no matter what, in this case, the user age is set to, it is going to always execute this block of code that's actually in the do while loop at least once, because as you can see, the order in which it operates, it executes before it even reaches the while condition. So, no, and the other example that I showed you, the while loop was actually a line before the code within the while loop. But in this case, the while condition comes at the very end. So that kind of tells you a little bit how this loop is going to execute in comparison with the normal while loop. It's going to execute its contents at least once before it even considers the while condition. So in this example, I'm basically getting the input from a user, and this is a really good way to use the do while loop, is to get input, because when you're getting input, you're going to ask the user at least, you're going to want to ask the user the question at least once. And depending on their input, you may continue to ask the same question or request the same type of input from the user. So basically, I'm using a scanner object. That's one way to get input in Java. And basically what you're going to do is you're asking the user, you're saying, please enter your age. And then once the user enters the age, you're assigning whatever the value they entered to the user age variable that you created earlier in the program. And as long as this user age is equal to 0, which is what it was originally set to, you're going to continue to ask this question from the user. So until they enter something besides 0, you're going to continue to ask them for their age. And let's see if this is working correctly. Let's go ahead and run this. Please enter your age. So just to test this, I'm going to enter 0, 0, 0, 0. And as you can see, it continues to ask me the same question, and that's how it should function. So I'm going to enter my actual age. And as you can see, I can't type anymore in the input. So that do while loop has executed, it has exited, and it now is just printing out what I entered. This is a way that the do while loop can be used in Java. This is a really simplified version of it. In actuality, when you're receiving input from a user, you're going to have much more functionality here. So you're probably going to have some type of exception handling, and probably some type of way to distinguish between variable types that the user is inputting. For example, if you're asking for a number, you're going to want a way to make sure the user is actually entering a number and not a string or something of that nature. So in actuality, user inputs can be much more complex. You'll probably have some type of exception handling and things like that. But the reason I used this example that I have here is I just want to show you some fundamental concepts of the do while loop and how it functions in comparison to the while loop. I hope you guys learned something new. If you did, please subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.